Hello, my name is Person Mans, if you don't already know, and I'm trapped in a gas station dumpster. I Please send help. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome you to the Doom Patrol Retrospective. Over the past 2 months, I have read 95% of the comics featuring the Doom Patrol and any or almost any of its members. And I did this because my autism compelled me to. And my autism demands more blood, so you guys are going to have to listen to it if you want to, and you find it entertaining. So, before we begin, with two exceptions, the Doom Patrol members only ever appear, almost only ever appear in association with the Doom Patrol. There's actually three exceptions. If there's a Doom Patrol member that will show up in a comic, it's almost always Robot Man. So he has more solo appearances than anyone else, except for Beast Boy, who transcended being a Doom Patrol character when he joined the Titans. So we are not going to follow every appearance of Beast Boy or his stepdad Minto, because he also went that way during the 80s and 90s. And I have read the crossovers in full that the Doom Patrol are involved in, but we will only be recapping the very basic points of the parts that don't involve the Doom Patrol. But before we get started, a little bit of a recap. The Doom Patrol appeared in an anthology comic in 1963 called My Greatest Adventure, which had been running since like the 50s. Now, to give you an idea of what this book was like, the previous issue was about a dinosaur attacking a modern military base, so it was kind of a weird anthology, which there were a lot of back then. And I I have a guess as to why they decided to go the superhero route with this issue, but I will get to that later. But suffice it to say, the Doom Patrol took over the book, and within like 6 months, the comic got renamed to the Doom Patrol. And it was brought to us by writer Arnold Drake and artist Bruno Premiani. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I think I did. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the TV series that came out in the past few years, but that is mostly outside the scope of this analysis. But without further ado, I think we should get going. We open on a rustic brownstone in a major city that is later stated in this run to be New York, but they later retcon that into, I think, Midway City, which is just made up. So a bearded man in a wheelchair is talking to three shadowy figures, telling them that the three of them are all outcasts and considered freaks, and that he knows what that's like because he's in a wheelchair. Um, him knowing what they're going through because being in a wheelchair doesn't quite work anymore. I'm glad society has progressed to the point where paraplegics are, considered normal. But anyway, this man is called the Chief, and he gives the rundown to our three mysterious guests. And before he starts explaining their backstories, he literally says, "Don't ask how I know this. Seems legit." First up, Rita Farr, who is not like other girls. She was a famous actress, was doing her own stunt work in Africa when she fell off a waterfall and got exposed to some strange gas, which, if I had a nickel for every time that happened. And she gains the ability to grow giant and shrink very tiny. And she initially couldn't control it, but now she has perfect control over it. And this is a weird point because she's never depicted not having control of her ability, so she's technically not an outcast anymore, but she still doesn't embrace society. But whatever. Moving on, we have this Invisible Man cosplayer, Larry Traynor, who was flying an experimental plane, because it's always an experimental plane. And he crashed that plane after going through a weird cloud and gained the ability to summon a shadowy energy duplicate from inside himself. They specifically say it's like made of radio waves here, but I think they wreck on that later. And he has a strict timer of 60 seconds that he can have it out, or he'll die. This is Cliff Steele, former race car driver, current Ben Grimm copycat. During a race, he was in a horrific accident. His brain was put in his robot body. I don't think that this part was ever mentioned again, but I guess here Cliff competes in every sport in the world, and when he got his robot body, he actually tried to still compete, but the other athletes were like, you gotta be high if you think we're competing against a robot. So he's kind of just has no prospects anymore. And the chief is like, you may be a robot, but you're still a man. And Cliff is like, shut the fuck up. Paraphrasing. But the chief reveals his trump card that he's the surgeon that put Cliff in a robot body. And that convinces everybody to hear Chief out. For whatever his proposal is. The chief shows him his supercomputer that can do whatever the plot wants it to, mainly spot trouble. Then a time bomb is announced on the news, and Larry sends his negative spirit very, very fast to go pick it up and bring it back. Rita shrinks very tiny. They go inside it, and Cliff just holds it, which I feel like that's not helping. But they managed to disarm it. And maybe I'm just a really cynical person, but I would have been extremely suspicious that this specific scenario that can only be resolved with their exact powers came up as Chief was proposing this superhero team. But whatever the circumstances, it works, and they agree. We cut to an old guy in a military outfit spying on the chief with science. And we find out that an unmanned UFO crashed somewhere. We also find out that the old man's name is General Immortus. And that, as you might have guessed from that name, he's immortal. And he has big mads with the chief. They are unfriends. Anyway, the Doom Patrol show up at the spaceship crash site, but Immortus arrives at basically the same time and attacks them with a tank that looks like this. So that's pretty cool. They take out the tank barely, but Immortus shows up with specific weapons designed to counteract them. He manages to get past them and into the spaceship. But what he didn't know is that the spaceship was in a kind of self-repair mode. And while he's in there, the self-repair finishes and it just takes off. And he fiddles with the computer, but the ship explodes, and Immortus is seemingly blown to bits. But Chief has his doubts. And they're applauded for their hero work, which is a big thing, is that they are publicly heroes, but they're still considered freaks. That's going to come up throughout the run. And that's issue 1, or rather issue number 80 of My Greatest Adventure. Now, before we go on, I feel like we need to talk about the X-Men controversy. A lot of people, Arnold Drake included, believe that Marvel ripped him off when they created the X-Men, who are another superhero team of mutated societal outcasts led by a man in a wheelchair. Now, I don't really believe this because the similarities, I feel like the similarities would be more specific if they were indeed ripped off like that. But also, X-Men only debuted 3 months after the Doom Patrol, which is just, even back then, these comics took time to make. So unless Stan Lee had insider information on what this one author was doing in this one weird anthology book, I don't think it's true. That's my opinion. Also, and I don't know if Arnold Drake ever tried to deny this, but he was obviously inspired by the Fantastic Four and just the Marvel method of writing superheroes in general, giving them flaws and having their powers be as much a curse as a blessing. So I would say that these writers knew that they were on a new frontier and they were just inspiring each other. So yeah, I don't think anyone was deliberately ripping anyone off. Moving on to issue number 81 of My Greatest Adventure. Rita is making sure that a hentai doesn't break out. And while we're looking at this cover, I think now is a good time to actually talk about Rita. Rita Farr rules. And she rules from basically the first issue. Her characterization in this run is not perfect. It's still a comic in the 60s. So there's a lot of the way they treat women back then is present here. But she is still, like, unambiguously the strongest and most powerful member. And although occasionally the men in her life treat her like shit, she still feels empowered and feels like she's making her own decisions. And that is very refreshing from a book from this era. Like, if there's a giant monster, you send Rita. And, like, she's the heavy, and you don't see that in comics from this era. Although she kind of goes through a lot with a certain douchebag that we'll get into, but anyway, Rita Farr is a badass, and I don't think they fully recaptured that anywhere except here. Okay, so this is skipping ahead a little bit. These issues open with a panel that takes place later in the story. But the cover happens, the scene on the cover happens, and they fight the giant octopus. But Chief doesn't have any insight on why the giant octopus attacked the cruise ship, because his miniature camera attached to Cliff didn't see it because he was above the water. So they just go about their day. But then they're rescuing people from an avalanche, and a snow beast attacks. And as you can see, Larry is like, "We gotta fight that snow beast," and Cliff is totally gaslighting him. Is like, "Guys, snow beasts aren't real. You guys are crazy." And Larry gets pretty upset at that and goes to blow up the cabin full of explosives that is over there for some reason, and they take out the snow beast. And Larry is mad that Cliff did nothing to help, and Cliff is like, "I genuinely didn't see anything." And as they're leaving, we learn that the press has dubbed Cliff, Larry, and Rita Robot Man, Negative Man, and Elasti Girl, excuse me. But actually, in these early issues, they call Cliff Automaton and they call Rita Elastawoman, which is Elastawoman is better. There is a 40s character called Robot Man that Cliff looks identical to, but I don't think any in-universe connection was made between the two until like the 2000s. Anyway, Cliff is a little stressed that he's not seeing things that other people see, and he thinks that his brain has been damaged, so he goes to yell at the chief for ruining his brain. And the chief is like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But then on TV, a man in a monocle that I bet is a good guy, named Dr. Janus, speculates that the monsters are the harbingers of an extra-dimensional invasion from a meteor. Duh. But he cites a news report of living beings being seen climbing out of a meteor, and Cliff gets more upset because he remembers that meteor, and there were no reports of men climbing out of it. And but everyone else remembers it as men climbing out, so he's like again doubting himself, but he can't shake the feeling that something's fishy. And something is fishy because we cut to Dr. Janus and he's literally a Nazi, just immediately. He's just being himself. Anyway, they find evidence that the newspapers have been altered and that there were no actual invaders in the meteor. They soon also learn that Dr. Janus is Joseph Kreutz, who has invented a machine that makes people see and believe things that never happened. And he looks so trustworthy too. It's a damn shame. Anyway, there's a giant dragon attack that they have to go deal with. And the Cliff tries to go walk through the dragon to prove that it's not real, but Dr. Janus accounted for this and just makes it look like the dragon has picked up Cliff and is eating him. So the Rita grabs the dragon by the throat, but she's actually crushing Cliff. And Cliff manages to get free and decides that enough is enough, and he quote-unquote jams a live power wire into the dragon, which actually just disrupts the radio frequencies that Dr. Janus is using to summon these illusions and dispels them. And then they catch Dr. Janus and save the day from the world's greatest gaslighter. There is a backup story in this issue, but it is completely unrelated to the Doom Patrol, so we are going to skip it. And moving on to issue 82. Cliff has been in the microwave too long. What it feels like to be a Hot Pocket. Again, nearly every issue for a while opens with a scene that's later in the book, so we're going to skip past that. The Doom Patrol are being honored with a fancy dinner. But first, there's this newspaper publisher, Roy Jameson, who is seen buying a spy camera shaped like a cigarette lighter and gives it to Rita during the dinner because the chief's identity and even his appearance is a complete mystery to the public, so he wants to get the big scoop. And he manages to get the picture from the transmitter and get a picture of the chief. And I mean, that's just not a very good picture, but Cliff is enraged at the idea of a traitor because they still don't know each other that well. But Chief's a little stressed out, obviously. One would ask why he's so secretive, but I guess they have asked that, and he's like, mind your business. Anyway, he tells Rita that he knows that she's not the traitor, so he confides in her his real backstory. He's actually a humanoid alien from beyond the stars, and he went to investigate Earth because of their atomic testing. He gets shot down when he enters Earth's atmosphere. Because there's one thing that we're good at, it's shooting down aliens. And in the crash, he lost the use of his legs. He became wealthy by selling his alien knowledge. And then Rita's like, I'll keep your secret. And then later, when she's taking a walk, the handbag that she keeps the lighter in is stolen. And by an agent of Jameson who reports the alien story. And the patrol in chief are in the lab looking at the supercomputer, watching the news. And Cliff is like, what the fuck? You told me you were raised in a Tibetan monastery. And Larry is like, you told me you were a scientific experiment. And the chief is like, I lied to you because I wanted to sniff out who the traitor was. But Rita's like insistent that she's not the traitor because she's not. But the chief decides to figure it out later. But meanwhile, a bank president, a senator, and a leading scientist all confer and talk about the news that Chief is an alien, which they are concerned about, because the three of them are actually... they're aliens too! They've infiltrated Earth, and now that they know Chief is an alien, they feel threatened, so they decide to give him an offer they can't refuse. And, failing that, just kill him. Larry's talking to the chief about how he has a crush on Rita, but if she knew what he looked like under his bandages, she wouldn't want to take him to the dance. The aliens show up and they explain that they've built a network of devices that will start to heat up the Earth and make it look like the sun is causing it. And then their race will show up and make it look like they've solved the problem, and so they'll just immediately have a foothold without a single shot being fired. And the chief pretends to go along with this, but actually sends the patrol to actually find the Earth heating device. And the aliens try to stop them, but they fake, the Doom Patrol fakes having much more advanced technology than Earth actually is capable of. So they're intimidated into fleeing, and they manage to stop the global warming device. Cliff gets melted pretty bad, but as long as his brain, as long as his head is still connected to his torso and his brain is still intact, he'll be fine. They just build him a new body. The aliens leave because the chief's alien race already has a foothold here. And then Rita realizes that the chief still has not actually told him anything about himself, or told them anything about himself. And the chief is again like, mind your own business. Do I snoop into your life? Yes, but that's beside the point. Another unrelated backup story, so we are gonna end the issue. Negative man goes berserk. So we open on a guy threatening to shoot a tank of natural gas, and the Doom Patrol manages to stop it, but the chief feels like they weren't performing at their best, so he decides to test the limits of their abilities. He drops 20,000 pounds of weight onto Cliff, which he's barely able to handle, and he wants to see how far Rita can shrink, which is roughly this small. This just looks like a scene from one of her movies, to be honest. And then they decide to see if 60 seconds is actually the limit for Larry's negative spirit, which I think is a terrible idea. But they send the negative spirit out, it's caught in a weird experiment, because there's always a weird experiment going on, and goes berserk. And Larry can no longer summon it back, so Chief has them toss Larry into a cryogenic tube so he doesn't die. And the negative spirit starts going berserk and smashing up power plants and radio installations while the Doom Patrol comes up with a plan to trap him. two career criminals decide to take advantage of the chaos in order to pull bank jobs. And an army general gets on the TV and starts talking about destroying the negative man. And the chief sends Rita to go have a polite talk with him. Rita is so cool. The army agrees to let the Doom Patrol try their plan of just creating a giant lead funnel that leads back to Larry, but the career criminals, I guess, just want this to go on forever so they can just rob banks forever. So they try to stop the Doom Patrol, but that goes about as well as you'd expect. They manage to get the negative spirit put back in Larry, and everything is fine. Yet another unrelated backup story, so I'll see you next issue. That art looks like something else. Anyway, this is the first issue where they face a recurring foe because General Immortus is back. So a bunch of old rocks from ancient Babylon have been stolen, and the chief suspects that the only possible culprit is General Immortus. The computer shows a simulation of how Immortus may have escaped using an escape pod, which I don't feel like something his computer made is compelling evidence, but everyone else is convinced. And of course the computer is correct. Anyway, they go to the museum and catch the thieves in the act, but before they can stop them, Cliff turns on Larry and Rita. But he says he's not in control of his body. But he fights them off and goes back with the thieves into the truck where our old friend is there and controlling and bragging that he can control Cliff using radio waves. The chief continues to reveal how sus he is by saying Cliff's body has a transmitter that they can use to track him. Immortus takes Cliff to his automated diamond mine staffed by robots, I guess, and then encases Cliff's body in molten lead so that no one else can control him, and also places an explosive in his head that will destroy his brain. But they managed to track down where Immortus is. And I don't entirely see why Immortus needs this scheme if he has a automated diamond mine that no one else knows about, but Rita's trying to be tiny and sneak in, but he spots her and forces her to turn giant and excavate all of the Babylonian treasure that he's after. But Larry shows up, and General Immortus pushes the detonator, but the negative spirit is able to outrun the spark from the detonator and cut the wire so that Cliff's brain doesn't go kaput. But unfortunately, Immortus gets away in a plane. Unrelated backup story, you know the drill. And this is the last issue before they rename the series to Doom Patrol. Alright, this is an issue that gets on my nerves. Because it simultaneously mistreats Rita, but also shows why Rita is a badass. They managed to go to rescue a crashed cargo plane because it was carrying important medicine. And Rita was really kind of the standout of that mission. She was the MVP. But as they're debriefing back at the mansion, Chief kind of yells at Rita. Well, he's kind of like wondering, like, what's stopping you from just going back to society and getting back into movies? And he's even like, I know that you turned down an acting role recently. And Rita's like, I like helping people more. And Chief is like, the point of the Doom Patrol was to make them accepted, and resuming acting would do a lot towards that. And Rita gets pressured into resuming acting, even though she really doesn't want to. And she accepts the movie role. And then after Rita leaves, Chief is like, Larry, Cliff, it's boy time. Let's discuss our secret plans. And the director tells Rita, listen, you're just going to be a normal actor. We're not going to have you do any of your growing and shrinking stuff. You could just be an actress. And the movie's actually about her husband who's shrinking. But while they're filming on a set of a giant table, the actor breaks his leg. So Rita volunteers to switch roles so that she's the one that shrinks, which also means that they save money on sets and stuff. But then, after filming for a while, she finds out that the director always planned on making her use her powers for the movie shoot. And not only that, but the chief knew about this and just wanted her out of the way for some reason. We find out that there was a crisis going on deep, deep underground. Basically, a bunch of living nuclear reactors are running havoc underground, and the chief thought that this was too dangerous for Rita, so he had her distracted with the movie thing. Rita comes back to the mansion, learns where they went, and commandeers one of the drill ships they used to go after them. And Cliff, Larry, and Chief almost die. They would have died underground, no one knowing about it, if Rita wasn't Rita. But she manages to save them, and they stop the nuclear monsters. And Rita tells the chief that if he ever does that again, she's gonna beat his ass. So again, there's some cool Rita stuff, but it does mistreat her, and it's one of several issues where all the men in her life decide to keep her out of the loop because she's a girl. We skip the backup story to move on to Doom Patrol 86. Love is love, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. So, yeah, they've officially switched to the Doom Patrol name. So the chief is kind of just rolling around, wondering where everyone is, and then we see Larry in his room, sending the Negative Man out to steal a stone from one of the pyramids, which is like the most Caucasian thing I've ever seen him do. But he carves it into a sphinx. Rita turns tiny and engraves something on a tie clasp, and Cliff tries to crush coal into a diamond, but just creates dust. And it turns out that these are gifts for Chief's birthday. It's not actually his birthday. He won't tell them when his birthday is, but they've decided to celebrate his birthday today anyway. And this gratitude and kindness makes the chief shed a single tear. And later, Rita's like, how come I've never seen your room, Larry? And Larry's like, no girls allowed. And then he goes in and starts removing his bandages and talking again about how she wouldn't like him and kiss him if she knew what he looked like under the bandages. And a bunch of weird heists are going on, and the chief reveals that the test moon base that they went to in the issue with the reptile aliens is that all of the technology there was actually built by the chief, but there was actually a piece of technology missing from there, which is a giant fuck-off robot that somebody stole and is using to wreak havoc. I just want to take a brief aside to, like, Bruno Premiani. His art is so clean, and he stays with this for the rest of he stays with the comic for the rest of the run, so it's really is exquisite. But the robot is named Rog. The power of Rog. It turns out that he's being piloted by a Mr. Morden, a one-man crime wave who will in no way be important. Morden manages to threaten Cliff and Larry to get Rita to back off in order for him to escape. And then Morden goes to a girls' school in France and sees the headmistress and says that he's ready to see the brain, and the headmistress is like, sure. The headmistress is named Madame Rouge, and he's greeted not only by the brain, but Monsieur Mala. The brain is exactly what it says on the tin. He's a disembodied brain in a jar. Monsieur Mala is a gorilla that the brain experimented on to have a genius IQ. Together with Madame Rouge, they are the Brotherhood of Evil, and Morden's robot-based crime was basically his pitch to join. Is his audition. So Chief Supercomputer puts together that the Brotherhood of Evil is behind everything. Although there are too many potential next stops for them to be everywhere, so they just decide to guess. It turns out their guess is right, because they decide to scope out the Statue of Liberty. And that's good that they chose there, because the plan is for Rog the giant robot to water ski on these two boats and go over and steal the Statue of Liberty so they can ransom it back to the United States. Which is certainly bold. I feel like you could just blackmail politicians or something. So Rita turns giant to take on Rog, and Mala jumps out of the robot to fight Cliff. Gorilla versus robot. No matter who wins, we lose. The Brotherhood gets their ass kicked, but they get away by pretending there's a time bomb in the Statue of Liberty, but Rog is unfortunately destroyed. And again, Larry mopes about the bandage problem after their victory. And another unrelated backup story, so we will actually get an answer to the bandage mystery right now in the next issue. The terrible secret of Negative Man. The Doom Patrol save a plane that has a blonde French woman named Mademoiselle Swarlett. And she's immediately sweet on Larry, who reciprocates. Rita is jealous, and Cliff is just kind of in a weird sexist mood today. Did anybody ever tell you when you're angry? And curiosity killed the cat. It might also do it to a chick. Okay, Cliff, jeez. So the Mademoiselle has told Larry her dark secret, which we are not privy to at this moment, and gives him a little smooch. But then we learn that she's actually Madame Rouge on a sinister scheme for the Brotherhood of Evil. Rita is curious as to why Chief and Larry are in a locked room and won't tell anyone why. It turns out that Chief is replacing Larry's bandages with some kind of formula, and Larry says that without the bandages, he would destroy everything around him, because he's super radioactive. Rita is rightfully suspicious of the French woman, but I don't like that it's just framed as her being jealous. Madame Rouge is spinning a story that she's the daughter of a scientist who invented a way to make any clothing super elastic. And she gets Negative Man to go into a buried time capsule of the scientist and photograph all the science stuff so that she can reclaim her father's patent. And he gives the photo to Madame Rouge, and when she reports to the Brain is like, this is too important. So Mala and Brain fly to New York. Madame Rouge and Larry are on a date, and she excuses herself to talk to a little girl who is actually a little person in disguise. I could think of less conspicuous ways to get a message, but whatever. Rita is straight up spying on them and finds out that she's Madame Rouge. It turns out that the actual invention that Larry took the photos of is an enlarging ray that can turn a toy tank into a real tank and handguns into giant artillery, which isn't quite how either of those things work, but whatever. But anyway, it's bad news. Rita tries to reach Larry and warn her about the scheme, but she's captured and put in a taxi, and they use the threat against Rita to force Larry to comply. And Larry's like, Rita, we we knew all along it was Madame Rouge. We were onto them from the very start. And then Rita says, "Oh, did I pull a boner?" Which of course used to mean something completely different back in the '60s. This happens a couple times in this run, where they don't let Rita in on the plan for no real reason. On one of those occasions, they actually say, "Your reaction needed to be authentic. Sir, she is an actress." What are you talking about? The Brotherhood unleashes an army of tanks and mechanical men that have been enlarged, and the only way to stop them is to find a way to disrupt the radio signals. And Larry knows a way to do it, but he doesn't like it. He has to take off his bandages. I think he looks handsome. So Larry does manage to stop it, and they take out the tanks and stuff, but it turns out that enlarging ray has a defect, which makes the enlarged material crumble to dust after like an hour. But unfortunately, they cannot get Mala or the brain, but they managed to capture Madame Rouge and the little person who does not get a name. And Rita is glad that Larry's finally opened up about himself, even though it wasn't exactly his choice. And while not every issue from here on out has a backup story, every backup story from here on out will be Doom Patrol related, starting with this one, which I did not take any screen caps of because it's just a story of Robot Man going to pursue a fugitive alone on an island where Cliff gets his limbs torn off one by one, so he's just a torso and has to headbutt the guy to show his ingenuity. And Rita comes by and saves him and apprehends the criminal, and that's about it for that. And now for the final issue we will discuss today. Doom Patrol 88. Rita, no! A cruise. We open on a cruise ship for a bunch of rich assholes is robbed by a monocle-wearing scoundrel called the Baron. And then he robs an armored car, and he's bored with how easy this crime thing is. So he announces that he will rob a specific place in 10 days and challenge anyone to stop him. And he manages to surprise the police by robbing the bank from underground. But the chief anticipated it and sends the Doom Patrol after him. But the Baron's like, "I've planted dynamite in the subways. If you don't let me leave, it goes off." So they have to let him go. The chief has put the crimes in his supercomputer and deduced that the person behind the Baron's crime spree is General Immortus. Okay, I guess. And the Doom Patrol is finally like, "Why are you so scared whenever Immortus shows up?" And the chief is like, "Listen to my harrowing origin." That's right, it's finally time to learn the chief's backstory and his name. As a young man, the chief, aka Niles Calder, was good at every single field of science, but the medical field really intrigued him because he wanted to try to prolong life and conquer death. But unfortunately, he was borderline homeless and had no good way to implement his research. But then an Asian stereotype comes in and says that his employer wants to pay him $2 million to fund his research on the condition that he uses whatever his research comes up with to develop a way to give immortality to his employer. And Niles is like, "Fuck yeah." And he gets the money and starts doing his research. And I know that this isn't really relevant, but they show the panel of the chief's experiments, like he created a two-headed mutant dog I have no clue what that has to do with anything. But anyway, the chief invents a resurrection beam and fires it on a dead rabbit, and the rabbit just comes right back to life. So the chief reports success via the radio to his employer, and the employer's like, we'll call you next month. And then the chief decides, and I can't stress this enough, he decides to show off how smart he is by tracking his employer's location to surprise him. But then he realizes that he's in the middle of a massive criminal conspiracy by, as you probably guessed, General Immortus, who is running out of the elixir that he uses to stay immortal. And he'll run out in a couple centuries, so he needs an alternate solution. The chief is like, I'll never work with you, and Immortus is like, deal with it. They knock Chief out and implant a bomb in his chest that can be detonated at any time and will go off if it's removed from his body. So Chief tries to figure out what to do with this dilemma, but then he comes up with a clever scheme. Burst into Immortus' house and get shot. And Immortus is like, well played, I guess. He just lets the chief go as he's slowly dying from his gunshot wounds. I don't get it. But somehow the chief gets back to the city from wherever General Immortus' house is. And he gets back to his lab where his robot assistant lays him out on the table and agrees to follow the plan Chief set out. The Chief dies on the table, and then the robot removes the bomb, which is deactive now that Chief is dead, and then he uses the resurrection ray. But unfortunately, Chief was dead for too long, and now his legs are useless. He has the robot destroy every single trace of the research, and then he destroys the robot, so the only remaining trace of the research is in the Chief's mind. Well, and the patrol stews on that thrilling tale. The Baron stages another crime spree, which turns out to be just a way to lure the Doom Patrol and neutralize them. I know I'm showing a lot of pictures of this issue, but I just want to show this because the internet has absolutely ruined my brain. I hate it here. Anyways, the Baron has the patrol all captured and helpless, and the Chief is like, what do you want? And the Baron pulls off his face, and it's General Immortus, who says the patrol is dead unless you give me the fucking immortality beam. But the Chief pulls a fast one and manages to free the Doom Patrol, but the General manages to get really fast into his escape train. Which Rita grabs the escape train, but it turns out it's more than just a train. This panel is really funny to me, and I don't know why. Anyway, they blow up the rocket that Immortus is in, but they just kind of assume that he's not really dead. And that does it for this issue, and I think we'll call this part 1. Since we've concluded a little arc about the Chief's identity. So that ends part 1 of the Doom Patrol retrospective. Thank you for joining me. Feel free to comment if you have any feedback. We have a lot of issues to go through. It's going to be a long road, but we'll make it. Take it easy and stay safe.